Sometimes I just don't want to talk. But I guess that's why I'm here. It's nice. It's nice to enjoy meditation. It's always a gift because it's not always the case. So, any questions or comments about practice? What we just did? Are you speechless too? Thanks. It's good to be back. I like the circle. Feels good. Feels different. Just a little different. Just enough different. For me. Yeah. It was hard to leave at that time. You know, I had planned to leave way in advance, and then everything started changing. And I couldn't really be here to feel it with you all. But I'd check in from time to time with Eve and get some updates from Bhavan and Eve and the board, and I'm really glad that we're still here and co-creating this in a very, seems like a good way. So I'm happy to help that in any way I can. And I'm enjoying holding it with Eve because it means that we can rely on each other. I'm going to be traveling in late October to late November. I'll be in Europe teaching, so Eve will really hold that then. But yeah, anything else? We're going to do, yes, in a moment, we're going to do, before I forget, Feeding Your Demons on October, I think it was October 16th. So every once in a while I'll try to lead that, like we used to do at the last Wednesday of every month. But since I might not be here that last Wednesday of every month, I'll try to do it every 4 to 6 weeks as a rhythm. So that'll be the next one. It's a guided process where it's like a meditation practice of 5 steps where we have an opportunity to kind of meet and dialogue with and feed, not fight, that which is kind of challenging us. So any emotional feelings or even like physical illness or pain, you can work with all sorts of different things with feeding your demons. It's really wonderful. It's really fun. Feed your demons, meet your ally, learn from your ally. So, yes. Sorry. Yeah. Can everybody hear her? Maybe speak a little louder. Use your big voice.
I've been trying to stay energized with meditation practice so that I don't sink into somnambulistic unconsciousness.
Yeah.
So I noticed that today when I was doing that I was really struggling with staying in my body. Like I felt like I just wanted to jump out of my skin.
Huh.
So I'm curious. I think I've nailed the don't fall asleep.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to figure out the other extreme, which is try not to leave your body. I don't know, it just felt like there was a lot of energy inside and I didn't know what to do with it or where to put it. So I kept counting my breaths and just keeping here, but I kept doing these brushes.
Is that a common thing or is that just unique? Okay, good.
It's happened a couple of times.
Okay. Yeah. That's a good question. No, I'm feeling your feet. Let that energy dissolve down into the feet. Sometimes when we meditate, we get an excess of what's called the prana vayu, which is like the wind, the upward flowing wind in the body. and the head can get active, especially if you're trying to energize. You might be utilizing more of the head energy. So that's prana vayu, upward flowing prana. And it can go also out. That's more vyana vayu, which is the outward flowing. This is Ayurvedic words. So with spiritual practice, it's very important to get also balance that with what's called apana vayu, the downward flowing wind. And so meditating on the feet, the earth, feeling the relaxation descend down into the feet, which I did a lot of in this guided practice, can be very helpful to balance the pranavayu, which is going up, get that to balance with apanavayu going down. And so I like to meditate a lot on my feet. Like, can I feel my feet? Are they soft against the floor? Can I bring the breath down into my feet? It helps bring that excess energy, whether it's up here or out there, in an integral way. It's good to use that energy. It's nice to have that. Yeah. 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 Yeah, so like I just answered you more from a yogi perspective, and then there's the mindfulness meditator perspective, which is like, don't do anything. Which is just watch it. So, because often if we're resisting, like, what do I do with that? If we're trying to not resist or fix or change or do something with it, then it can imbalance it even more. So then there's also that option of just sitting with it, and it will pass, hopefully. You might need to do yoga before and after, or after. Right. Yeah. 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 Yeah, report back next week. Anyone else? You see the two different mentalities? There's the yogi and then the meditator. The yogis are always fixing things. You know, when the yogis come to meditation class, they're always like, you know, and then they want to fix, maybe do some spinal twist, forward fold, gotta just get just right. Because we're always doing that. And then in the mindfulness practice, it's like, don't do that. There's the fixer again. Watch the fixer. Always trying to get it just perfect. Now that's good to work with too. Sometimes we need to fix, sometimes we need to just let be. And to learn to be with the uncomfortable or pleasurable sensations. So. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you need?
Yeah.
And I mean, you have a comment about like when to choose which, or is it better to stick with one thing or a period of time?
Yeah. 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 There are many different shamatha practices, as many as there are people. It said the Buddha taught thousands of different kinds. As many people as there are on the planet, there are different approaches we could use. The most well-known is the breath awareness meditation, and even within that, there are different foci, right? You could just do one here, or it really would. They say it's the sensation between the upper lip and the nostrils, so the air passing right here. Or it can be the air in the belly. That's very common with Zen, not the air in the belly, not gas, no, but the feeling of breath in the belly. That's a very common focus for Zen. Then there's the full field of tactile sensations that are triggered through the full arc of the in and the out breath. I like that one, so I tend to teach that one because it's very soothing. Soothing. Yeah, there might be a little tension that happens if you're just trying to focus right here. but which can be good for a mind that's too dissipated. It can help focus the mind. So if you're feeling dissipated, you could apply the antidote of shamatha, focusing at the sensations at the tip of the nostril. If you're feeling too tight, then you could loosen it with belly breath or full field tactile sensation breath. But there are others. That's just within the breath technique that I've named. Like the Tibetans like to do a lot of visualizations. So they do either like a bindu, like a little orb of light, or a little statue of a Buddha. You might gaze at an actual statue of the Buddha, and then once you've kind of got it memorized, then you close the eyes and bring it to mind with perfect detail. Sometimes a double, like a vajra shape is visualized, a golden vajra in the space in front of you. So they're really more big on the visualization, although shamatha with breath is done in the Tibetan tradition. There's shamatha on the mantra. You can focus on a mantra, oftentimes paired with a visualization of a deity or energy, or light. So when to practice what? What do you need? So think of meditation like an antidote to a disease. So are you too dissipated? Then choose one that's focused. If you're too tight, then choose one that's softer and more open. And then yes, it's good to focus on a technique until you really get stable with it. So stick with one thing. I like to say that when you learn something new, stick with it for 100 days so that you get a good deepening with it. Then if you kind of veer off and do some other things, you still got it because it's rooted in you. But ultimately they say you should do a practice, sadhana or spiritual practice, and really accomplish it. Like really stay with it until you feel that you've had signs of accomplishment. And signs can be good dreams, auspicious dreams, like having a meeting with the Buddha or teacher, or bliss in your dreams or in your meditation experience. Signs of kind of purifying your perception, more clarity. So it is good to do that, but of course you come and one night I'm teaching one technique and then Eve's teaching the other. Don't worry too much about that. You're here in a community setting. Follow what the teacher's doing. So whenever you go to a class, don't be like, oh, well, I'm just going to do my own thing. Like, do what the teacher's teaching. Try it on. And then when you go home, you can do whatever you want. But you're here. So give it a try. See if it feels good for you. But it's true, we're kind of like in the era of spiritual materialism where we have access to so many things. Too many, like too much choice. Which can be a funny place to be. It's a privilege and it's a curse. It can be confusing and destabilizing. So it's good once you get something that really works for you. Like last time you said the counting really worked for you, so stick with that for a while and see. Now you're noticing different stimuli come up around that practice, so watch that. Don't just leave it and think it's not working. Like there's a great, she's deceased, she died in the 80s, but Deepa Ma was a Vipassana teacher that said she was enlightened. There's a great book called Deepa Ma, it's her name. I highly recommend reading it, but she would just say, learn one technique and stick with it all the way. It can take you all the way. So she was really pushing against the whole spiritual materialism thing. She was not. I know. She was from Bengal. She lived in Calcutta.
How do we explain that so many different practices arose from the original teachings of the Buddha?
I know.
He couldn't have given all those options.
No.
So things developed out of.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how many different directions.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people over time, they feel there's some adjustment or enhancement or different angle we need to take on things, because it's true that if things don't respond to the times and change, they get stale and stagnant and can die, right? So I like that changeability of the tradition, just as long as it's rooted in the authentic Dharma. Yeah. 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 No. No. Yes and no. It's said that the nature of mind is like the sun. It's ever radiant, and that thoughts are like the rays of the sun. They are not the sun, but they're not different. Yeah, they're expressions of the sun. So they're not different than the sun, but they're also not the sun. The sun is the sun. So Rigpa, or pristine awareness, in Tibetan it's Rigpa. In Dzogchen, if you're speaking of it from the Dzogchen perspective, Rigpa is luminous nature of mind. If you say Rigpa and you're from any of the other lineages in Tibetan Buddhism, you might just be talking about the quality of knowing. So it depends on what tradition you're speaking from. It's interesting. Like as a translator, you have to know, I'm translating for a Nyingma Lama. I'm translating for a Gelug Lama. That means something different. But what it is our Buddha nature. It is, the luminosity is said to be a characteristic of Rigpa. So it's said that Rigpa is vast like space, but it's not space, because it's different than space, because there's the quality of knowing, and that is imbued with that quality of luminosity. Clarity. The term in Tibetan is selwa, and sometimes it's translated as clarity, and sometimes as luminosity. Lately I've been just saying luminous clarity, because they're both good. And that's really what we drop into. That's what's like infiltrating all of our experience, is that luminosity. It's like it's like the light that illuminates all perception. Okay? Yes.
It's actually something that Shasta said about
Yeah, the signs.
the sign. I guess that it was not bothered. It intrigued in my mind a little bit because, I mean, for a few reasons. That one, it feels like that's something to strive for, and that feels like not such a good
Yeah.
thing. And the others, I have this little book that I got here. It's actually an amazing little book. It was just like this free book, and you can actually download it on your phone too. It's really amazing, and it has just these little pages of like wisdom that I don't know, some monk wrote it. But one of my favorite pages talks about like when you think things are really, your practice is really going well, I'm just doing so good that it might actually not be going that great.
Yeah.
And that when you think it's like you're kind of in the shit in the depths of like this just
Yeah.
I'm just angry and having all these feelings
Yeah.
and stuff, that it actually might be going really well. And that if you ask maybe teachers, they would say, "You're doing great, stay right there."
Yeah, don't bail.
Yeah, so I guess, because I have terrible dreams all the time. I'm like, shit.
You have trouble dreams? Oh, terrible dreams.
All the time. And so I'm like, oh boy.
Yeah.
Especially when I'm on retreat, they're really bad.
Yeah.
I feel like my rooms in Spirit Rock are like possessed.
Right. You're purifying. Off-gassing. Yeah, I think both are true. It depends on what you're talking about and what context. But hell yeah, it's important to know that like when things are feeling really shitty, that's actually a good sign, because it means you're dredging up the depths, you're purifying, you're clearing. And also, I mean, that's our work, is to integrate everything onto the path. I mean, remember what we were doing for a couple of years before I left was Lojong. That's all about bringing it all on the path. So, and that's juicy, and it's important to integrate. So, and then also when things are all hunky-dory and everything, it's easy to get complacent and lazy or sit back, and it can actually not really mean anything. It could be. So what I was talking about was more from the framework of like, Like when you're working with a particular practice or doing a certain kind of deity yoga, where this is more from the Vajrayana or tantric perspective, where say you've gotten a practice for Tara or Avalokiteshvara, and you want to really steepen it, and they say accomplish it, but the word is drup in Tibetan, but it means really like become it, like become, like you have divine pride and you are manifesting as the qualities of a Buddha through the practice. There are 3 ways to kind of work with that process. You might go into retreat and do depth practice, you might practice from home, but you can either do a certain amount. It's like you have an assignment. You can either do it by hours, by counting, or by signs. So there's 3 ways of measuring. And really, it's kind of silly, and some people, push back against this, but it was common for like monastics to be like, oh, I've got this practice, now I'm going to do 1,000,000 recitations of Om Mani Padme Hum, and then I will accomplish it, But what it is it creates a framework. It's like going to graduate school, It's important for us to not get too judgmental around this kind of goal-based practice, because that was their graduate school, How do you measure? Well, then there's also the hours. So how long does it take to do 1,000,000 mantras? Well, maybe it takes 3 years, or I don't know how many years, how many hours. And then, but the third way, which I find very appealing, is just noticing the signs of accomplishment. Like, can you integrate all the shit onto the path? Like, can you experience the dredges coming up, but not be totally reactive and caught by them? Are you experiencing different types of signs in your meditation where bliss is coming, or clarity, or luminosity, where you get it, where you're like, oh my God, I get it now. Those moments. Dreams are one of the signs. So anyway, I guess it depends on what angle you're coming at. Yeah, the context. Yes.
Can you talk about the striving mind just more generally outside of meditation, and specifically comparison and how that relates to the striving mind?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I know. It's like, for me, the striving mind is our friend and our foe, right? So again, it depends. It depends. That's one of my teachers always answers questions like that with, it depends. It's a good answer. So, like on the spiritual quest, it's nice to have direction and a sense of striving for something, of overcoming your suffering, finding the truth, knowing who you are. I mean, these are great things to strive for, to be a better person. Without striving, we'd be blobs. We'd never feel like we had a sense of direction or purpose. But then it can go into hyperdrive and become our foe by becoming like driving us in a way that's detrimental and destructive. And then like we're so driven we miss the whole point and we become total jerks, or we get lost or disillusioned with the path because we're so driven, we've worked so hard and we're exhausted and we don't get it. We're not getting it. So striving can be our friend or our foe. Friend or foe. And so, what was the second part of your question?
Even the first part was more about like outside the spiritual path, just
Oh, right.
striving mind in daily life.
Yeah.
I feel like I have that more often than striving for meditation.
Okay.
Striving for other
Yeah, I don't know anything about daily life. I just talk about spiritual stuff. No, kidding. Yeah, daily life, I think the same thing. You can apply that in the same thing. Striving at work. You want to do well, but does it make you become out of balance with your rhythms, with your cohort, with your team? Have you ever worked with somebody who's so obsessed with like being the star, you can't even stand to be around them? So I think that the striving can be used for good and greatness, but ultimately we can't lose our sense of like balance and humanity, because the ego is the striver, really. So we need to befriend our ego. We need to have a healthy sense of ego. Like, what do you really want? And then work for it. But the ego can also be the foe, because then we measure ourselves based on what we've achieved, and rather than who we are. I feel like I'm just saying like greeting card quotations right now. I'm striving. Yeah.
I find that mindfulness in a deliberate way
Yeah.
is very helpful when I'm in the middle of something that's stressful and my mind is going like this.
Yeah.
I can only deal with one thing at a time. It seems that
Yeah.
lately in my life, a huge number of problems have arisen, but I can only pay attention to one at a time. So mindfulness, just, okay, what am I doing? I'm sitting here, feet on the ground,
Yeah.
surrounded by lovely people,
Yeah.
a great teacher. But just coming back to where I am,
Mm-hmm.
is a kind of rest from
Yeah.
laziness.
Good. The Buddha was right. That one teaching. You know that multitasking is bad for us. It's not good. A lot of us assume that if we can multitask, then we're better at what we do and we're smarter. But it actually makes us less mentally agile. And I think a lot of us are feeling that dissipation that comes from trying to multitask too much. It's not the right way. So yes. Yes, yes, yes. Feel feet on the ground. It's my practice.
Bring yourself back to where you are.
Back to where you are and the people you're with and your breath and what's right in front of you. Yeah. Good. Shall we move into the next piece, which is this very sweet book, Beyond Religion, by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, one of my root teachers. One of the greatest beings on the planet right now, and he's getting older, so we have to enjoy and learn while we can. So, Eve and I kind of kicked this off a couple weeks ago, and there's a book study format that we're using for this, but you don't need, it's a 40-page document, it's way too long for a handout. So we're going to be riffing off of this week by week and inviting you to think about and talk about and share, meditate on some different aspects of it. And so I wanted to lay out a couple ideas and then ask you to share about it. So as we started last week, we talked about what is this kind of idea of secular ethics and what is secular. And the secular definition of secular that the Dalai Lama is using is different than what a lot of us might think of as secular. Rather than secular being kind of against religion, not having religion, secular, he's using the definition that we find in India, which is more of an embracing of the multiplicity of views and religions. So that's what he's meaning by secular. And then ethics is just simply like a moral code. Like, how do we make our communal life more harmonious by having a certain kind of rules? You know, no stealing, no killing. Be nice. Do unto others as you would have done unto you, the golden rule. And so he's proposing that we need this kind of, to really talk about ethics outside of religion, because so many of us feel like religion can be stifling or toxic. Not everybody, but there are times when religious institutions have been very toxic and bad. So bringing kind of ethics out of the religiosity and bringing it more into a secular domain where we have an openness to a multiplicity of views, and we're not bogged down by superstition or blind belief. And so the Dalai Lama brings up an interesting teaching or concept that he teaches on again and again. Every teaching I've ever gone to with him, he talks about this. He talks about our fundamental human nature, and in terms of our humanity, our shared humanity. And what's interesting is he is saying that there's no real, I can't even read my writing, but across cultures, there's no real consensus about the kind of essence of what is our human nature. Some people and religions and thought believe that we are by nature aggressive, violent, competitive. Your question made me think of this. And then on the other side of the spectrum, some people, traditions, religions say that we are actually essentially good. We have a sense of goodwill and compassion and love towards others. And then there are a lot of different ways of thinking that fall between that spectrum of two extremes. The Dalai Lama says, quite frankly, he kind of subscribes or believes in the latter, that we are by nature good. That's what the Buddha taught. That this is our birthright, as Buddha nature is what we are born with, from life to life to life, from beginningless beginning. And whereas a lot of the Judeo-Christian thought says that we are sin by nature and that we need to redeem ourselves. So that starts from a very different premise. And I liked what he said in terms of what happens depending on which of those two views you take in terms of ethics. So I wanted to practice this. To read this. This is page 13 of the book. For those who believe that truth requires God, God alone can make ethics binding. Without God as the guarantor, they suggest there is at best only relative truth, so that what is true for one person may not be true for another. And in this situation there is no basis for distinguishing right from wrong, for evaluating good and bad, or for restraining selfish and destructive impulses and cultivating inner values. I actually read the wrong page. So I can't read my writing. That was a good quote though, wasn't it? Okay, here's the one I was looking for. So he says on page 18, generally speaking, if we view human nature as dominated by destructive tendencies, this is the first example I gave, our ethics will most likely be grounded in something outside of ourselves. This is interesting. So if we are by nature bad, then we have to get help from the outside. We will understand ethics as a means for keeping those destructive tendencies in check in the name of some greater good. If, however, we view human nature as predominantly oriented towards kindness and the desire for a peaceful life, then we can consider ethics an entirely natural and rational means for pursuing our innate potential. On this understanding, ethics consists less of rules to be obeyed than of principles for inner self-regulation to promote those aspects of our nature which we recognize as conducive to our own well-being and that of others. This second approach is in tune with my own. So he's saying that if we believe that we are inherently good, then ethics become kind of like, what is it, like in the bowling alley, they kind of help us, the lanes, but the sides of the lanes, the bumpers, that help us with this inner self-regulation. Like, I know I'm inherently good, but sometimes I want to eat too much chocolate, or, lie about something. Okay, but I've got to have these ethical kind of guidelines to help me stay within this better space. Self-regulation that promote the aspects of our nature which we recognize to be conducive to our own well-being and that of others. So I thought that was interesting. I liked that. So then I want to keep going. Then he proposes 2 pillars of secular ethics. There are 2 pillars of secular ethics. The one is this shared humanity. Shared humanity. And then the other is interdependence. These are so sweet. And so yes, Buddhist, but so not Buddhist too. So what is the shared humanity? Something he teaches all the time, and it's so true. The shared humanity, in a nutshell, is that we all long to be happy, and we all want to be free of suffering, no matter who we are. There's this basic impulse, and not just humans, but also animals, insects. We long for pleasure, we want to feel good, and we don't want to feel bad. That is a basic kind of shared humanitarian or human quality that we all have. And then through recognizing that that's true for all of us, then we can feel a sense of connection and understanding in the world with people near and far, and that we recognize that we all share that, and therefore can have compassion and try to help people who just are confused about how to do that, like including ourselves. And then the other pillar of interdependence. I mean, we see that scientifically, biologically, that what the Buddha taught as interdependence, or tendril in Tibetan, which is sweet because it kind of sounds like our word tendril, like we're connected, but in Tibetan it's tendril, which means interconnection. Sanskrit is pratita samutpada. It's a little harder to say, but it's a nice word. And it recognizes the interconnectedness of all things. So it's said that this flesh that we have as this body was at some point stardust, or is stardust, part of the stars. We're all breathing the same air. The butterfly that flaps its wing in South America can cause a tsunami in North America, or whatever that quote is, that there's all this interdependence. And when we recognize that, there's also more of a facility with feeling connected and interested and invested in the well-being of others. So these are his 2 pillars of secular ethics that he will base the whole rest of the book on. And what's super cool about this book is at the end, when he talks about different types of practices, he has all these just very simple, straightforward, more secular type practices, but he throws in some really good Lojong slogans. So we're coming back home. So what I would like to ask you is to think about, and then we'll break into a little group of 3 or 4. Think about this question of, how do you understand the term shared humanity? So I've offered you the Dalai Lama's definition and ideas around it, but I want to hear how you understand it in terms of your own experience of your shared humanity. What do you feel links you with others? So why don't you take a few minutes and turn to your neighbors and just talk for a few minutes. Just maybe take a minute or so to share. And if you're online, you could type in some things into the chat feature. How do you understand the term shared humanity?
Because you needed that. There were roaming bands opposing tribes. You needed because of them, which is us still that kind of shared humanity with suspicion of each other, which could explain but we also have I guess I'm sorry, there's good and bad things in our shared what? Yeah, the shared humanity, but how do we get this stuff? That's big we also crave things. Crave
I mean, I feel the shared community a lot. Because in the other right as they're on site.
Okay, about another minute. About one more minute. Okay, so let's wrap it up. Just finish your thought. And then we'll come back. And so let's come back, turning back towards the room, center of the room. Thank you, friends, your new friends, old friends. So would anybody like to share from what came up in that? I'd love to hear from one or two of you. Shared humanity. Now you're so quiet. Why don't do that? Come on, feeling left out.
We seem to agree in our groups that there's a lot of different aspects of shared humanity. Many of them not good,
Uh-huh. Not so good.
violent and mean, and not sharing, acquisitive. On the other hand, there are a lot of diversity and sharing at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
That's all shared humanity,
Mm-hmm.
and the crappy parts.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Between the three of us, as we talked about our experiences, we spoke of like going to a festival, going to a music festival, and just walking into that, going to a meeting where everyone is there for the same reason and people are sharing. And I felt that sharing comes from making contact in some way. And I have somewhat of a solitary life. I don't really much, but I make eye contact on the street with people.
Nice. Yeah.
That either through speaking with people or even just making eye contact with strangers, that common ground shows itself.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So now going to interdependence. I wanted to read a couple quotes to you, and then maybe we'll just share in a group, have some reflections before we close. The first one is from a woman, Adrienne Marie Brown. She's an activist, women's rights activist, a black feminist based in Detroit. She's a writer. She says, this is about interdependence. Do you already know that your existence, who and how you are, is in and of itself a contribution to the people and place around you? Not after or because you do some particular thing, but simply the miracle of your life. And that the people around you and the places have contributions as well. Do you understand that your quality of life and your survival are tied to how authentic and generous the connections are between you and the people and place you live with and in? Are you actively practicing generosity and vulnerability in order to make the connections between you and others clear, open, available, durable? Generosity here means giving of what you have without strings or expectations attached. Vulnerability means showing your needs. Vulnerability means showing your needs. That's a good one. So I love that because she's an activist. She's a community activist. She's really working on the ground. And then another quote I'd like to read from you and then hear from you. Read to you and then hear from you is about the Dalai Lama. This is from the Book of Joy, Lasting Happiness in a Changing World. It's very sweet. The author says, I asked the Dalai Lama what it was like to wake up with joy, and he shared his experience each morning. I think if you are an intensely religious believer, as soon as you wake up, you thank God for another day, and you try to do God's will. For a non-theist like myself, but who is a Buddhist, as soon as I wake up, I remember Buddha's teaching the importance of kindness and compassion, wishing something good for others, or at least to reduce their suffering. Then I remember that everything is interrelated, the teaching of interdependence. So then I set my intention for the day, that this day should be meaningful. And meaningful means, if possible, serve and help others. If not possible, then at least not do harm to others. That's a meaningful day. So how does that land for you? Any thoughts? Interdependence. What does it mean for you?
I think I love it as an ideal, like waking up with joy. And I feel like a lot of times I'll wake up with the opposite of
Yeah.
stress and wanting to get things done and like, churning mind. And that it often takes a lot of work to like get back to that state.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
is this something that you've dealt with at all? And
Yeah.
suggestions of like
We have to train our minds.
wake up with more joy.
We have to train our minds. If I told myself to wake up with joy, I'd probably shoot myself. I definitely you can see how the Dalai Lama spun it. The question was, how do you wake up with joy? The Dalai Lama didn't say, I wake up with joy. He talked about how he's lojonging, how he's training his mind when he wakes up. We have to train our wild minds. We all wake up with different shades of emotions. But once you wake up, that's the time to cultivate. Right when you, like oftentimes, like I learned from my Tibetan friends and teachers, you could get up right away and just sit up in bed and make a simple prayer. Before you go pee, before you do anything else, just get up and make a prayer. Remember whatever teachings that have touched you about wishing, like our shared humanity, the good part of the shared humanity of, all beings wish to be free of suffering and experience happiness. And may they do that. A great quotation from one of the Dalai Lama's favorite authors, Shantideva, a great Buddhist teacher from the Shantideva? Okay. Oh, great, thank you. All right, I learned something new. Relearned it, thank you. The 8th century, CE. Yeah, good, okay. Got it, I believe you. Okay, so Shantideva, it said, all the joy, all the sorrow in the world comes from thinking only of ourselves. All the joy comes from thinking from others. Did you guys study that a little bit? It's a good one. That's something to think about. So thinking of others, waking up, aspiring to do something good, and not always thinking about ourselves. How am I going to be happy? That I find is definitely helpful for me, personally. Huh?
Whenever I hear that, I just think, oh, all the poor codependents.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's great. I have a friend who wakes up with anxiety a lot. And
Yeah.
she told me earlier that she's been for like a week. She read something, and so she just wakes up and she says, "Good morning" to herself.
Uh-huh.
And she said that has been like setting sort of a really different tone for her day. Sort of like
Yeah.
being herself.
Yeah, yeah.
And it kind of puts her in a different. Yeah. And then she
Yeah.
does other practices, but like,
Yeah.
oh, that's very sweet and simple.
It's simple. Yeah, just turning the love in. Not taking that for granted. Taking oneself for granted. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes.
To me, realization of interdependence is there's a lot of fear that prevents that, and whenever some of these walls that block more realization of interdependence, whenever these walls fall, there's another wall, another fear, or something like it seems like there's a constant process of dropping fear,
Mm-hmm.
somehow getting more somehow confident, and then there's still another fear, another fear.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think that we need healthy boundaries, but at the same time, on a deeper level, we don't. and that the fear is self-created. The fear is self-created. What if? It's a projection, what if? Yeah, but it's a good point. We need to question ourselves, we need to question, is that really my limit or not?
I have a question about the problem when you're trying to act in a way that's a benefit to other people. You often encounter hostility, and there's not much talk about how you can keep your balance in a world where there is a lot of hostility and anger. Now, I think the Dalai Lama is kind of protected from that. He doesn't have people running up to him, shaking fists in his face and so forth. He's surrounded by peaceful people, I would imagine. And I'm thinking of, this all made me think of an experience I had years ago, riding on a New York subway, and there was a man across from me, and I thought he was like an interesting looking guy, and I was trying to catch his eye and sort of smile, and he said, "What are you looking at?" Well, that totally crushed me.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with that? You stop trying to be friendly?
Yeah. It's true, living in a city or with a lot of people, you do have to put up
But more
some,
than just the city,
yes, the negativity.
negativity.
Yeah.
How do you keep your balance?
Yeah, I mean, of course we don't want to go around being bleeding hearts and,
Right.
and idiot compassion people. But I mean, I'm going to go back to the Lojong teachings. Whenever you see suffering or you receive hatred coming from somebody else, notice how it makes you. I mean, our knee-jerk reaction might be would be to say, "Well, screw you, buddy. I was just trying to give you some love, you asshole." And then I get mad at them.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, what would we do in Tonglen? Rather than try to push away that negativity, transform it and breathe back out love. So you don't have to say anything, but you can work, because that anger is coming at you, but you have a choice about how to take it. And it's like the Wu Wei principle in the Qigong and martial arts. If you take that energy and then transform it and let it flow back in a different way. We have a choice about how we take that on or not. Yeah, there's always going to be that. And honestly, I would push back against your statement. He does not always have good, nice people around him. He is confronted with a lot. The Dalai Lama is confronted with a lot of hardship and anger. He hears about a lot of suffering. He gets death threats from the Chinese government. It's not all love and light around the Dalai Lama. And he has interviews and talks to and has family members and students and friends who have suffered under immense hardship in coming into exile from Tibet under the Chinese rule, people who've been in prison for decades. I mean, talk about carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders and hearing the most horrible things.
That's right.
No. I really trust that yes, it's easy to sound all love and light, but this is coming out of some deep work. Yeah? So I don't want to write him off as some spiritual dude on a high cloud. I lived in Dharamsala, and the Tibetans would come from Tibet just to get one audience with him and share their woes and share their experience with him. I mean, that guy has experienced heartbreak probably, 50 times a day on average. I could be exaggerating, but when it all adds up.
Good, that's helpful.
And then within his own community, people are angry at him for not being more forceful. People think he hasn't dealt with the Chinese in the best way. Not all of them, but there's a bunch of Tibetans who wish that he would have been more aggressive. But as a Buddhist monk, he couldn't. So that's part of the reason he stepped back, is he didn't want to be a politician anymore. It's an interesting dynamic. It's a tragic story. But it's time. There's your bedtime story. Yeah. Yeah, I think, yes, we do need to question and push back and say, well, what about this? What about that? You know, but I do think that this stuff is worth letting in and testing. Let's test it. Don't believe it on blind faith, but chew on it. Fight against it a little bit, but then try it. Try it in your life and see. This feeling of interdependence. It doesn't mean becoming the same as everybody. It's recognizing the interrelationship between all of us. And always coming back to our practice. It's one thing to keep it up in the intellectual realm, but then dropping it back down in to the meditative experience, and then see what kind of answers come from that space. That you have those answers too, right? We all do. So let's just say a personal prayer of aspiration and dedication to conclude our time together. Thank you. Good night. So, have a good evening, a good week. I will be back next week, and then Eve will come after that. So, I'll see you. Announcements, yes. Yes.
Thanks everyone for coming out, and thank you, Chandra, for that.
Yeah. Thank you.
What's that?
You got to get on screen. Do you want the mic too? Let's do the mic. Take it all the way.
Oh, this is terrible. Get down on it. Come on and wow, that's so loud. I'm Brendan, and now I'm afraid. And thanks for coming out. This is San Francisco Dharma Collective, and we are volunteer run and funded by Donna and generosity from you folks. So please give if you can. And at the front desk, and then if you can't, welcome, and also you can give by volunteering. We are always looking for folks to help and do the thing that I'm doing now, and make tea and tell people about bathrooms and stuff. We also have like a bunch of upcoming events, I believe a day long or a half day with Eve and some other folks, maybe. And one other thing, I went to Kelly Yee, who was doing a thing before this sit, and he took a couple weeks off, and he's coming back, and it's really good. It's a smaller group, and it's much more personal, but it's very powerful, good stuff to check out. And also, there's a volunteering potluck coming up, so if you were a volunteer, or even if you're wanting to be a volunteer, you could come to that and eat some food and meet some other volunteers and get excited. So that's Tuesday, sorry, this coming Tuesday. So anyways, thanks for coming out. Yep.